This is a new scenario I'm running over. It's if the entire world went to war, basically. Now there are 5 countries, as you can see here. There's dark blue, which are the allies. This means they're actively going to war and declaring war. There's the Axis, which is the opposite side. That means that they're also going to war. Then there's supports allies and supports Axis. This means they won't go to war, but will however they will support their side. That they'll support their side either diplomatically, letting them move troops through them, or with resources. And then neutral, those are either they don't care, they're split dead down the middle, or they just are so, or they're just so unstable that they can't fight. Alright, so I've already built the map. I don't know everything. Oh, and also some of the neutral countries I'm just not well educated enough to know about. And also some of the rules for this scenario is there will be no nuclear weapons involved, because obviously that's just a complete destruction immediately. Once a country does, so civilians can defend. However, once a country is captured, there won't be an insurgency, which will be important for just to make it work properly. And there will eventually be a peace deal, and we are going pretty intense on what countries would actually go to war. However, with all of the and the stuff in the water is naval power projection. All right, and with that said, let's get started. And this is assuming the Axis are invading, so we're starting. So the first big things that are gonna go on is Russia is going to be pushing. They've already got some stuff, but they're going to be pushing with all their military might into Europe, which will help them start. There we have Crimea, but they'll start pushing through. They'll push troops in through Belarus, pushing into the Baltics as well. Ah, shoot, I did not mean to go that far. So they'll be able to push a little bit through the struggle. But however, it's important right now in Ukraine. Russia's not putting their full force into it, and they're being backed by other countries. They'll push into Georgia and nearly take it, or they will take it. Now Turkey's navy won't be defeated, and this is the first big advancement. The next big one is China is going to basically start going to war with the U.S. Navy, and this will be the biggest fight in the whole bit. Because if China loses this, then it will not go well from there. However, right now we're going to keep these. Maybe the U.S. Navy pushing a little farther in, but not too much. And then China's also going to start an invasion of northern Vietnam. They're not going to get too far because it's impossible to invade Vietnam, but they will make advances along with in Nepal, although India is pumping troops and into eastern India, and little small amounts of gains in northern India with Pakistan, although these would come at huge losses. However, during that time, Bangladesh, India is going to invade Bangladesh and overrun it quite quickly, which will be not good. And then, with the help of China, North Korea is going to start pushing into South Korea. I don't think they would get too far. However, at this point, the U.S. is completely tied up, so they will start losing territory. And then coming on over into the Western Hemisphere, this is like kind of the opening stuff. This is like first month or so. Coming in the Western Hemisphere, and I should have had these as blue, but I didn't. It was my fault. However, Venezuela would declare war on Guyana and start pushing into it along with Colombia, which they will make. Oh, I did that wrong, but they will make some gains into this opening bit. However, they're going to be struggling to do much more. then the U.S. is just going to completely, immediately overrun Cuba. This isn't going to be a fight at all, really. And then the U.S. is going to start coming down into Venezuela as well, starting to push them in. They might hold out for a little bit because, they're rainforest, but not for very long. We'll put them for there at that point for now. They've pushed back out of Guyana. Now Venezuela's just got a tiny bit. They're just holding on by a tiny bit. So after this first bit, it's looking like the Axis are starting to do well. And this is and now going on to into the Middle East, kind of the final front here. With the combined power of Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, they're going to start pushing into eastern Jordan, pushing them heavily. And they might be able to make small gains into Turkey, but not significant enough. Trying to meet up with Russian troops, and they're able to move through some of the ex-Soviet states that aren't officially involved in the war, but are allied. And this will be difficult for the Allies to defend here, because they're just so tied up with Russia right now. And now coming back on over to Asia, the U.S. Navy is starting to make gains, very slowly, but they are starting to get there. So they're starting to push, and China has made an amphibious landing, taking part of Taiwan. However, they haven't taken it all. And during this, they've pushed a little bit farther into Vietnam as well, which isn't good. It still hasn't fallen. And India's navy will actually be able to start pushing back a little bit, as the Chinese navy is so tied up on fighting the U.S. Navy, which is obviously an impossible task. So at this point, the China's starting to be pushed back. However, they're still making gains. They're still probably going to be able to push farther into this eastern part of India, and probably a little more with Pakistan. Pakistan will make some minor gains. However, India is a fortress, and they've got so many people. It'll be very difficult, and they will push through Nepal and what's this? Bhutan. Yeah, I meant to put them on the blue team, but they would realistically use them as a land bridge, most likely, and immediately take that. And then, so the Middle East is still so the U.S. Navy is still encroaching on China. However, they're going to be tied up for a while longer. And then, at this point, Russia is starting to get pushed back, not really significantly, but they're starting to lose territory in the Baltics, starting to take minor losses in Ukraine, almost pushing up. I forgot to add that little chunk, and then, however, during this, they're also pushing through into Turkey with the combined force of the Middle Eastern countries. They won't make too much progress, as it's a hard country to crack, and they've got some support from southern NATO. However, they will make gains, and they will start to push into the last bits of Israel, though they're holding out still at this point. And then, so at this point, the Chinese Navy still is starting to, I meant to have this colored in, I forgot to. Yeah, the Chinese Navy is still kind of making South Korea kind of isolated. However, the U.S. Navy is still pumping troops through from Japan. South Korea will almost fall, but their United States will be pushing tons of troops in to make sure they can still get a foothold, as that would be one of the most likely for an invasion of mainland China. And then at this point, one of the bigger things of the war is going to be that the Axis is going to declare war on Saudi Arabia, which will be because they still need oil to fuel China, as China's on very low, and the fact that Saudi Arabia is given oil as they're allied more with the allies. The fact that they're supplying Europe and India with oil, which is crucial for the war effort there. I meant to. So they're gonna wanna push a lot of resources into that to start doing all of that, along with Kuwait. I should have probably had that just overran immediately, but so they're gonna start trying to push into Saudi Arabia. They will make some gains, and I think Saudi Arabia would actually start fighting Yemen in this situation. They would start making gains because Yemen really isn't powerful enough to make much of or put up much of a fight there. And the Axis are trying to push on this coast, but it really won't go too well. And at this point, even though the U.S. Navy is tied up for the most part, they're going to be controlling the Persian Gulf, which will make it a pain, and they'll have to worry about amphibious landings in southern Iran. However, alright, what else do we need to cover right now? Oh yeah, Venezuela, they got completely obliterated long ago. Alright, and this is where I'm going to say we're about 3 or 4 months into the war. And this is assuming we were starting in the spring. So now it's like August, or we'll say July at this point. And this is probably where the Chinese Navy really begins to crumble to the U.S. Navy, along with the Philippines and stuff, although those aren't as relevant. So they're going to start pushing. They're still going to be able to hold their coastline, I think, because Chinese land-based coastal defenses are very strong. But overall, they're still going to struggle to hold much more than that. And they had probably taken Taiwan at this point, but they're being pushed out of it. This will be brutal fighting, some of the most intense in the war, as usually island warfare tends to be. So they're being pushed back to their coastline pretty much. And this will be very big for the war, as if the U.S. is able to defeat China and stop them from getting oil from other places, that'll be a very big win, because China can't produce its own energy. So they're going to start pumping troops into South Korea. They'll start to take back almost to the original borders. And the Indian Navy as well will be able to start pushing in here. This will be a big... So this is kind of in my opinion, kind of the turning point of the war, to some extent, although there's still going to be lots more fighting. Let's get some of this. Oh, and yeah, I should have had where the Russian coast is like almost completely taken out at this point. They're really not powerful enough. And at the same time, we'll go to naval power later in Europe, because the European nations haven't really been fighting in China, so they've been able to focus their navies on the Russian Navy, which, while the Russian Navy is pretty powerful, it can't match all of Europe. So they're going to start being pushed back. Oops. Alright. And what else in here? Yeah, China's going to start pushing a little heavier into India. They really want to try to take New Delhi at this point. I don't think they will be able to, but it would be big for them, because India is such a big contributor. It's the second biggest contributor to the Allies besides the U.S. However, However, they're probably going to stop short of New Delhi. So we're entering into like August. The Middle Eastern countries have almost completely taken Israel. The U.S. has just been able to have a little sliver of it kept. They're starting to push back into Turkey as well. Not quite taking any major cities, but they're trying to push Saudi Arabia a little as well. However, with how hot it is, and when it's August in Saudi Arabia, they won't be able to make too many gains. However, on one front that is looking good for the Allies is the European theater, as Russian naval power has been pretty much crushed all over. Turkey has a powerful navy, along with overall all the Western European countries all have very, very powerful navies, and together they'll be able to defeat the Russian navy and push it back for naval superiority. And at the same time, they finally pushed Russia out of the Baltics, which will be a big. That'll be a big. They've started pushing into. I can't remember what this is, unfortunately. They've started pushing back into Belarus, making gains there. They're going to want to relieve Ukraine as well, because the Ukrainian soldiers have already been fighting, so they're trained, and they've got allies there that they can relieve. Although that will be tough because there's so many fortifications set up, and so they're pushing farther in. So now we're in about September. It's looking like the Allies are going to make a big push into Russia, because this is kind of their last chance to make a push before the Russian winter sets in, and NATO and the Allies are smart enough to know to not fight Russia in winter, so that never works. So they're going to start pushing farther and farther through Ukraine and kind of relieving them. Taking Belarus completely at this point. And Russia's pushed a little bit into Finland. And their goal before the Russian winter sets in, or even the fall really, is to take St. Petersburg. And this will be a tough fight because Russia's focused so heavily on in the Baltics, the push from the European nations. They're gonna be pushed out of Finland. Finland may do a little bit up here. It's hard to tell. It wouldn't be super helpful. And the Allies are gonna push farther up into St. Petersburg with bitter fighting, and their goal here is to basically make it back around to cut off St. Petersburg from the rest of Russia, and I think they probably could pull this off, although St. Petersburg can hold out a long time as the Russian winter sets in. So now come about mid-October, this is where we're at this point. The Middle Eastern countries have really started to push into Saudi Arabia, almost wiping it out completely. Not completely, and they've pushed into Bahrain and a lot of these areas. Yemen, Saudi Arabia is too busy fighting the other Middle Eastern nations, and Yemen retakes their lost territory and starts pushing a little bit, not substantially. And also during this point, So during this point, the U.S. Navy has almost completely crushed the Chinese Navy. Maybe a little shoreline defenses are left. However, there's very little left of the Chinese Navy, and there's almost complete naval superiority that's been obtained. So now the Allies have a dilemma here. they're going into winter on what they want their next play to be, like where they want their focus to be. In particular, the United States. Basically, deciding do they want to help Saudi Arabia and defend the Middle East? Do they want to help South Korea to hold on to that foothold that would be the most likely invasion for China, as the border with India um, is very mountainous and hard to invade and favors the defender heavily? Or do they want to focus on Russia a little more, or Vietnam? As all of those are kind of viable options, but except maybe the Russia one. So during this time, so there's maybe a little more play in Russia, although it's starting to get cold and you don't fight Russia in the winter. That never works ever. So they won't really make much more gains here. Although the Middle Eastern fronts are probably going to be the most active coming into the winter, and really, at this point, we're only in like mid-October, so the Chinese front and the Asian fronts are viable. It's mainly just that Russia isn't viable for much offense. So the big play here that I think the U.S. would do is making a amphibious landing into Yemen, which would be huge, as Saudi Arabia wouldn't have to fight a war on two fronts anymore, although they would still be outmatched. So the U.S. is starting to push in a little bit here, not too significantly. However, during this time, the Russians can kind of take their foot off the gas in fighting for. Since it's winter, they don't have to put as many troops into fighting the Allies on their home front. So what they're gonna do is they're gonna have a little extra spare manpower, and they're gonna assist the Middle Eastern countries in taking Saudi Arabia with the combined forces of Russia and the Middle East, and probably support from China as well, as they're not having too much major fighting. The fighting in India has kind of subsided. They're going to be able to basically take over the Saudi Arabian government and invade it, capturing it as a whole pretty much. And this will be very big because they can start getting oil, which they desperately need. So they've taken all of Saudi Arabia now. Maybe a little bit movements. So this will help fuel the Chinese economy, or Chinese war economy, and will be majorly hurting the Europeans unless they're able to take it back. As now a good chunk of the world's oil supply is in the hands of the Axis. And during this time, so during the winter, nothing's going to happen up in Russia. That's not viable at all. So the big focus is going to be on the Korean Peninsula and in the Middle Eastern front as a whole. Sorry about this. So obviously naval superiority is completely achieved in everywhere in the world right now. In terms of the seas, is completely controlled by the Allies. Now that being said, there could still be stuff that gets through, as the U.S. Navy is severely weakened. It's still, without the Chinese naval arrival, it's still the most powerful navy in the world, and the Russian Navy is destroyed as well. However, it's probably lost 2/3 of its tonnage, which means a lot less ships, so some stuff can still get through. But, coming into November, the big kind of pushes here are probably going to be in from the Allied troops that landed in Yemen, starting to retake Saudi Arabia. it'll be kind of slow as there's a lot of resistance here. Maybe actually probably not that much. Maybe with amphibious landings. And China is also gonna start being losses on the Korean Peninsula. However, there's going to be a very bold move by the Axis here, which is to declare war on Egypt, which will be a big thing. And Israel is fallen at this point. They haven't been able to hold on. The Allies may be able to start pushing a little bit through Turkey, and this is gonna kind of catch the Allies off guard. And their big reason they don't want to. The big reason for the Axis declaring war is not to defeat Egypt, it's to take the Suez Canal, which the Allies are using to resupply India from Europe, and India is really India and South Korea, or I guess Vietnam as well, are the only holdouts left in Asia, and this will be so they're probably going to be able to take it, I think, in this situation. Not too far, because they're gonna be heavily defended by the Egyptians, and the Allies are gonna be devoting most of their air resources to trying to make this not happen. However, it does, as they're pushing in. So now coming into December, now really the only fronts where any territorial gains can be made is the Middle East. Although at this point, I don't think there would be too much fighting, because all the world's militaries at this point are pretty much exhausted, and with the war in China, the U.S. has lost a lot of air power, and a lot of naval power. Particularly, air power is important in this. So they're probably gonna, for the most part, just kind of recover a little bit and lick their wounds, waiting for the summer. Although they will try to push in a little bit from northern Turkey, and Pakistan will probably start pushing in a little bit more into India. Although India is really putting up a very tough fight here, so they won't be able to make too much, as India is like a fortress. They've got jungle and mountains all around. Who owns this? Okay, I don't know who owns that, but I'm giving it to the Allies. I probably should know who owns it before I just give it to them, but I don't think there would be any holdout with no naval power for the Allies left. And Myanmar, at this point, they're going to be like one of the last nations, or like last nations to really do anything. They're going to declare war on Thailand, which will be a big play. Thailand's going to be able to mostly fight them back in this point. And at this point as well, said that only fronts that were viable were the Middle East, but I think the West is really going to be the big people who are just trying to lick their wounds here, or not lick their wounds, but just recover. Here, I think there would still be some fighting from the Asian countries. Basically, I think Myanmar would start doing that invasion as a surprise, because it makes no sense, basically. Which I know sounds strange, but it does happen. Alright, so coming into probably February here, the Allies have started to really recover. The Axis have pushed farther into Egypt, which is a big play. And with this, Sudan is also going to declare war on Egypt, pushing even farther on their southern border. So they probably couldn't push there, but this would be a big play. So, because Sudan wants an excuse to invade Egypt, basically, is the reason they're doing this. However, with the help of naval superiority, and at this point probably air superiority still, the Allies are going to start trying to retake Saudi Arabia, and their goal here is they want to be able to cut off the Axis forces pushing into Egypt. which would be big, and retaking the oil in Saudi Arabia. So they keep pushing through here, making territorial gains slightly. There's going to be a little bit up in the north as well, although Russia's still able to push in, so that won't go too well. And alright, now coming in to April. So now there's the Russian winter is ending, although it's still incredibly cold up there. The big plays here are going to be that India is starting to really take losses as their oil is really pretty much, they're completely out of oil at this point, which they need to run their economy. And China is still able to get Russian oil along with Middle Eastern oil, so they'll be okay. The Allies are going to start pushing more troops up into North Korea. It's still going to be fiercely defended because it's a tight choke point, and the Chinese don't want the Allies to push into their territory. The Allies are going to, I forget what this island is called, but the Allies are going to make a amphibious landing on it and take it over as a staging ground for a potential invasion into China at some point. Okay, so the big play here now, I think, for the Allies is they're going to try. They've got two options here. One, they can try to cut off Russia, or they can try to cut off the Caucasus, going from Ukraine to Kazakhstan, which would cut off a lot of the places where they produce oil and cut them off from the Middle East. Or they can go straight for Moscow. I think that most likely they're going to just go straight for Moscow with a pincer attack, basically going quick because they don't want to fight a long-term war. And they've taken St. Petersburg at this point. So they're going to start trying to push in through northern Ukraine and Estonia, starting to push towards Moscow. So that'll be a big play. However, they're not going to do that in a month. That's hundreds or thousands of miles, and Russia is still fighting hard. And the Axis have pretty much taken over Egypt at this point, and this is really bad for India because the Allies can't start sending supplies to India. It's going to be a lot bigger of a pain to now because they can't use the Suez, or they couldn't use the Suez Canal, but now they really can't, I guess. Alright, so, and now the Allies are going to start pushing for Bahrain and Qatar, I don't know how to pronounce it, to use their ports there. So, and also to cut off this little section. They're basically gonna have the Axis surrounded here, since they're gonna be pushing troops through Oman, and they're gonna keep pushing up through here because it's like the optimal time for fighting in Saudi Arabia at this point. Although they're busy with the push for Moscow, so they can only make some certain levels of territorial advancements.